Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us and welcome everyone. It's good to be here and welcome to Coffee with Foul Play podcast. And the title of our podcast today is Let's Work with KZ, and this is episode 1. And welcome guys, my name is Dr. Silkman. It's good to see all of you here and thank you for supporting us. If you like what we do, please subscribe, hit the like button, and give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or suggestions, please place them in the chat, and we will read all the comments, and we'll try and answer all of your questions. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. We really do appreciate it. Well, what we're going to be doing today, starting today, is we're going to be looking at Making a Murderer Season 2. And as you guys know, we've done Season 1, and we've been able to do, I think, 24 podcasts, and we've covered a huge amount of information. So please, guys, especially if you're new, have a listen to those podcasts. We discuss a lot of information there. Okay, now, our regular researchers who are joining us today, we have Bibi, Hanzo, we've got Kelly, Jack61, Neverly, Obi-Wan, and Spooky67. And our guest researchers today are K9 Kim, and I love this one Strand in the Rav, and they are our guest researchers for today. Also monitoring the chat, we have Catnip, Lily, Sammy, and Zoe. And guys, here on our Foul Play server and channel, we have many different podcasts that you may want to listen to. We have over 1,000 phone calls as well. These are the phone calls that Stephen made in discussion with his family, and you're quite welcome to listen to those. And we also have TTTs, where we look at specialized topics as well. Now, we have currently 889 subscribers, and all of us from the Foul Play team, we'd like to thank every one of you guys for your support and well wishes. We're truly very blessed. And so far, the YouTube channel has had over 246,000 views of our videos, and that's awesome. So thank you so much, guys. All right, well, one of our guest researchers is One Strand in the Rav. One Strand, can you tell us what attracted you to the Brendan Dassey and Stephen Avery cases? If you could just give us a few words, that'd be awesome. One Strand. I think you need to unmute your mic.
Sorry, sir.
No problem.
Too busy looking at everybody who's here. Basically, I am originally from the Illinois area, and my girlfriend still lives there. She actually watched Making of a Murderer 1 and 2 and told me I needed to go watch it.
Yes.
Having come from a registered nurse background, I couldn't believe the way things were not completely assessed and put all
Yes.
together. So I started searching and hit upon several of the YouTube channels, and actually it was a lot of your work that actually drew me to Foul Play, along with Linda
Awesome.
Kay.
Oh, awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of awesome people out there doing some great research,
Assessed,
and it's fantastic.
all
Yes,
together.
that we're all part of a team
So I started
here,
searching,
and everyone works really, really hard.
Of the YouTube channels,
and we're here to bring out the message to the wider population. Thank you so much, guys. Well, let's make a start. If we have a look at slide number 1, this is really where we left off from MAM 1. And we know about the cases. We know about Brendan Dassey. He's in prison and he won't be eligible for release until another 28 years' time. And he'll reach the age of 58 years before he's eligible to be released from prison. We also know the case of Stephen Avery. He's been sentenced to life in prison without the chance of early release. Now, what we're going to do in MAM 2 in these podcasts, we're going to look at the cases separately. I feel that it's easier for our listening audience if we look at the cases separately, and then that way we can keep a much tighter focus on the material that we cover. Because if you see MAM 2, what you'll notice is there's information about both Brendan and information about Stephen, and at times it can get quite confusing and overwhelming. What we're going to do is in the podcast series, we're going to look at Stephen Avery's case first. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of forensic evidence that we can discuss. Unfortunately, in Brendan's case, we can sum up the forensic evidence in 3 seconds. There isn't any. With Brendan, unfortunately, it's all confession-based, but with Stephen, there is forensic evidence that we can discuss. Okay, so guys, let's go to slide number 2. Now, even before Making a Murderer was released, even before it was released on Netflix, it was already making an impact. And as you can see here, the Horbach family, of course, who were affected, they released a statement, and I'll read it out. Quote, "We are saddened to learn that individuals and corporations continue to create environment and to seek entertainment, and to seek profit from our loss. We continue to hope that the story of Teresa's life brings goodness to the world." So as you can see, Making a Murderer was already having an impact even before it was released to the general public on Netflix. And of course, this tragic story is really all about Teresa Horbach and what happened to her. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 3. Well, we all know, and as One Strand in the Rav said, Making a Murderer had a massive impact on society. I think over 40 million people originally saw MAM 1 and they were angry. And it had a massive and immediate impact in society. In fact, a petition was done and it was given to the White House, right? And I'll read their response. I quote, "Since Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey are both state prisoners, the president cannot pardon them. A pardon in this case would need to be issued at the state level by the appropriate authorities." And so the game begins, guys. So quite clearly, a lot of people saw Making a Murderer. A lot of people got very, very angry and started to become proactive. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 4. Now, as you know, during the trials, when the trials were going on, certain individuals were filmed. And as you can see here, both Ken Kratz and Under Sheriff Robert Herman at the time, they were extremely confident and they showed a lot of smugness, right? They boasted about the guilt of Stephen and Brendan, right? And as you can see, you've got a big smirk. This is after the verdicts were read on Ken Kratz's face. And Under Sheriff Robert Herman, he made that famous statement that it would have been better for Stephen Avery to have remained in prison, even for a wrongful conviction, because Teresa Horbach would likely have still been alive today. So if we go to slide number 5, well, big changes took place. So if we look at slide number 5, you can clearly see that making a murderer had a massive impact on a lot of individuals. So during the post trials, you can see the dramatic changes that took place. Ken Kratz himself, he was the lead attorney, prosecutor for the state. He had received, I believe, over 4,000 threats and a lot of death threats as well. People were very, very angry with him. And you can see the sourness on the look of Herman's face. The MTSO received many, many complaints, right? And one of the comments, and this is one of the G-rated comments, so to speak, and I'll quote, "The entire country hates you and your county." And it's very interesting that the MTSO kept all the emails and all the correspondence from people basically stating their displeasure in the way the MTSO and, of course, the way Ken Kratz and his team handled the court cases. All right, so guys, if we go to slide number 6, you can see that, and this is from MAM 1, and we've covered this already. Both Stephen Avery, he was represented by Strang and Buting, and this is from 2006 until he was sentenced in 2007. And we all know the outcome. A jury found him guilty, and Stephen Avery was sentenced to life in prison. Okay, if we turn to slide number 7, well, as you know, guys, hiring attorneys is very expensive. And Stephen Avery only had limited funds. So this is slide number 7. He then had to rely on public defenders. The public defenders helped him during 2008 through to 2011 in his post-conviction effort. And unfortunately, and no surprises here, things did not turn out too well for Stephen. And as of today, of course, he still remains in prison. Well, if we look at slide 8, and God bless her, Sandy Greenman, who was Stephen Avery's girlfriend at the time, she started looking for potential attorneys that could take on Stephen Avery's case. And she got many rejections. But Sandy wrote many letters to an attorney by the name of Kathleen Zellner, and this took place over a 4-year period. And she didn't get any responses for a long period of time until in 2016 she had received a letter from Kathleen Zellner, and I quote, in that letter, Kathleen stated, "I have the experience and ability to get Stephen's conviction vacated." And of course, this was tremendous news. All right. So guys, especially for the new people, who is Kathleen Zellner? So let's have a look at slide number 9. And I quote, "You really have to be living under a rock if you didn't know this. But Kathleen Zellner, she has won at that stage 17 exonerations. And that's the highest number for a private lawyer in the United States. And from the exonerations, she has been able to recover millions and millions of dollars for her exonerees. And one of the most famous cases was Ryan Ferguson. And really, guys, if you've got an hour or two spare, have a look at the Ryan Ferguson case, because there are many, many parallels to the Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey cases, and this really was a very difficult case for Kathleen, and Ryan Ferguson eventually got released, and it was awesome. But the important thing about Kathleen Zellner is that she's often been described as being a fierce and formidable opponent. She's very, very tenacious. She takes on cases where no one expects that case to be won. So she takes on very, very difficult cases. And of course, now she's going to represent her new client, Stephen Avery. So if we turn to slide number 10, I like this slide here a lot. Straight off the bat, Kathleen Zellner made it known that she was very, very critical of Ken Kratz. And of course, Ken Kratz was the prosecuting attorney in the Steve Avery, Brendan Dassey cases. And so you've got this potential battle that was going to take place between Ken Kratz and Kathleen Zellner. But of course, as history points out, a lot of changes took place, especially in Ken Kratz's fortune, and he no longer is on the case. But still, it'll be awesome, and I think everyone will agree who's listening in, it'll be awesome if Kathleen Zellner can place Ken Kratz on the stand in front of a judge and grill him. Okay, so guys, if we go to slide 11. Well, as soon as Kathleen Zellner took up the case for Stephen Avery, they put out a statement. And this would have sent shivers down the spine to a lot of people, especially in the MTSO and in the state of Wisconsin. And I quote, "The Zellner law firm is looking forward to adding Mr. Avery to its long list of wrongful conviction exonerations." And this was awesome. So you've got a very high-flying, respected, very successful attorney taking on the case of the Stephen Avery case. If we now turn to page 12, slide 12, and what Kathleen Zellner loves to do is send out tweets. She likes to keep everyone informed about the case and how things are progressing. So she's got a lot of really good and excellent communication with the Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey supporters. And I quote, and she sent out this tweet, "Stephen Avery thrilled about chance of new forensic testing like innocent men always are." And it's really interesting that Stephen Avery wrote a note, I quote, "To my supporters, I want every forensic test possible done because I'm innocent." Signed, Stephen Avery. And so really, guys, especially in the MAM2 podcasts involving Stephen Avery, we're going to focus on the forensic science. That's going to be very, very important in these podcasts. And if we look at slide 13, it's pretty obvious. Have a look at Nancy Grace. What does Nancy Grace do? Now, remember, Nancy Grace wrote the foreword to Ken Kratz's book. And Nancy Grace states, and we're looking at the potential reasons as to why Avery is guilty. A big talking point throughout the trial and every time Ken Kratz is interviewed is the so-called sweat DNA. A lot of emphasis was placed on the sweat DNA. And I quote, "Avery's DNA on victim hood latch, under her hood, the DNA was sweat." So quite clearly, what people did was they focused on the forensic DNA evidence. If we have a look at slide 14, one can see that this case had a universal appeal. It was everywhere. Everyone talked about it, including on Dr. Phil. And as you can see, they discussed the so-called evidence that apparently was not discussed in Making a Murderer. And of course, in Making a Murderer 2, all of this material is now gone over with a fine-tooth comb. But it's interesting that if you have a look at the slide featuring Dr. Phil, the key word there is sweat, sweat, sweat. So the impression is that Stephen Avery was sweating profusely and leaving his DNA everywhere. So quite clearly, the forensic DNA evidence is very important to follow and to understand in this case. So if we have a look at slide number 15, well, of course, Ken Kratz was not impressed, especially with the Making a Murderer series. And he says, and I quote, "This is so-called regarding inconsistencies." He was not very happy with Making a Murderer 1, and he certainly was not going to be very happy with Making a Murderer 2. And I quote, "You don't want to muddy up a perfectly good conspiracy movie with what actually happened." So quite clearly, Ken Kratz was being very critical of the filmmakers of Making a Murderer. He believed that they were not saying the true picture, and that the show was very biased against the state and pro Stephen Avery, pro Brendan Dassey. However, guys, if we look at slide number 16, you'll notice something. In every episode of Making a Murderer, they always include this slide at the end. And it's very important, and I quote, "The following individuals either did not respond to or declined the invitation to participate in the series." And if you have a note, Tom Fallon, Tom Fassbender, Norm Garn, Mark Wiegert, and Ken Kratz are just some of the individuals who refused to participate in the Making a Murderer series. So therefore, Ken Kratz, you can't complain about the portrayal of the material on Making a Murderer if you didn't want to participate. So I believe that there is a new series coming out in which Ken Kratz will feature in it. So it'll be very interesting to get his perspective on how the cases went down. Okay, let's have a look at slide number 17. And I love this slide. Kathleen Zellner doesn't mince her words. She's very serious. She's very studious. And Kathleen Zellner warned Stephen Avery, and I quote, famous line, "You would have to be an idiot." So basically, she warned Stephen Avery. She said, essentially, "I'm going to hire specialists. I'm going to hire experts, forensic experts, to look over this case. If my forensic experts find that the evidence point to your guilt, I'm going to present it as it is." And she even stated that she's going to do a better job than what the state did. So Stephen Avery said, no problems at all. So Kathleen Zellner's approach to this case is she's going to focus on the forensic evidence. So essentially what Kathleen Zellner wants to do is to unpack the state's case against her client, Stephen Avery, piece by piece. All right, if we have a look at slide 18, this to me shows the seriousness of Kathleen Zellner. What Kathleen Zellner did was that she purchased an identical vehicle to Teresa's Toyota RAV4. Now, we're not going to get into any controversy about colors, etc., etc., but she knew the importance of the Toyota RAV4, and I quote, "She bought a Toyota RAV4 because so much of the evidence was concerned with the car," right? So she knew that if she was going to unpack the case against Stephen Avery from a state's perspective, she had to try and unpack the forensic evidence that was present in the Toyota RAV4. All right, so if we have a look at slide 19, now we all know that Ken Kratz used the media to his advantage. And I quote, "The state immediately gets on the front foot by utilizing the media." And as we can see here, Stephen Avery was grilled during an interrogation session on November the 9th, 2005, by both Fassbender and Wiegert. And that particular interrogation got very nasty the moment Stephen Avery mentioned planting of evidence in the Toyota RAV4. And Mark Wiegert said to him straight out, "How does your DNA get inside of her car?" And Stephen Avery was shocked, and you can see that. And he said, that's because they got blood out of me, right? And so he's already planting, pardon the pun, the notion that someone had planted evidence against Stephen. Sheriff Jerry Pagel made the comment during a conference, and he stated, "Never been in Teresa Halbach's vehicle? We now know that's a lie." So guys, put it in your mind straight away, the power of that forensic evidence and the impression that it gave to the general population. So as you can see here, Pagel's already saying, well, Stephen Avery lied, right? We know that he was inside Teresa Halbach's Toyota RAV4. And Ken Kratz, during a press conference, had stated, I quote, "No longer a question who is responsible for the death of Teresa Halbach." Now, guys, this happened super early in the investigation. There's been no trial, that forensic evidence is being gathered, and one can clearly see very early on that the state had a tunnel vision approach. They were only looking at one man, and that was Stephen Avery. Jack, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, just briefly, anyone that hasn't seen or doesn't understand the power of the media and just what little we do have in terms of being able to look back at that time frame, go to N64 channels, N64 controller channel, YouTube channel, and look at the dozens of videos that he collected and continues to collect as he can of the older archival news footage, and it's clear of what they did. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jack. Oh, look, there's no question. And unfortunately, I even have to say it myself, this occurs worldwide, including Australia, whereby if you want to send out a message, give an impression to the wider public, you get the media in. And the media, of course, they were very complicit. They were very happy. And a lot of this information got released in the media even before a formal trial. So people are getting the impression that, hey, Stephen Avery must be guilty even before any evidence is examined properly. Okay, if we have a look, and thank you, Jack, for that comment. If we have a look at slide 20, this is the approach that unfortunately Strang and Buting did not take place. What Kathleen Zellner did is that she hired experts from the get-go. Now, Kathleen Zellner at that stage did not have access to the hard physical evidence. She had photographs that had been published and had been released. She hired Stuart James. He's been in this game for a long period of time. He is a blood stain pattern analysis. She also hired Dr. Larry Blum, who's a forensic pathologist. And they got together and they basically looked at the photographic evidence. So guys, let's turn to slide 21. And the first thing that the experts looked at was Stephen Avery's blood in the Toyota RAV4. Now we know, guys, from MAM 1 where and who found the Toyota RAV4. And eventually the Toyota RAV4 was photographed, and inside the Toyota RAV4 there were droplets of blood. Now we also know that Stephen Avery had a cut on his right middle finger. We can see the photograph over here. Now, that photograph was taken on the 9th of November when he was arrested, and they took photographs, they checked his body, they did swabbing, etc., etc. So the question is, did the blood from the cut on Stephen's finger, is that the cause of the blood present in the Toyota RAV4? So really the bigger question here, guys, is, was Stephen actively bleeding on the 31st of October 2005? So if we look at slide 22, we can see here that there are discrete droplets of blood in various locations in the Toyota RAV4. There appears to be a smear near the ignition switch where you put in a key to start the car. There's a smear of blood on the black CD case, and there's also droplets of blood on the seats of the Toyota RAV4. You can see them as white spots. If we look at slide 23, we can see that there were flakes of blood found near the front seat. And finally, there was a droplet of blood found on the metal frame of the Toyota RAV4 in the back section on the passenger side, not in the cargo area, but in the back seat area. You can see there's a smear of blood as well. If we look at slide, so in essence, guys, 6 droplets of blood were found in the Toyota RAV4. And when the droplets of blood were swabbed by Cherie Culhane, she was able to get a full genomic profile, and it belonged to Stephen Avery. So if we look at slide 24, we're nearly finished, guys. What the experts wanted to do is to see if they could reproduce the blood stain pattern found in the Toyota RAV4. So they took blood and they smeared it on the same finger that allegedly Stephen Avery was bleeding from. And what they did was that they opened up the handle of the car, the vehicle. This is the vehicle that Kathleen Zellner purchased. Lo and behold, when they checked the door handle, blood was present on that door handle. And what they did is they tried to start the car with the key. And every time they tried starting the car, even with a bleeding finger, because they kept on putting blood on the finger, no blood was deposited near the ignition switch. And what they did is they put a white piece of paper, and blood would easily show up on that white sheet. No blood ever got deposited on that sheet. And what Stuart James said was, if Stephen Avery was bleeding, the blood would have dripped down to his fingertip, right? And so when you think about that, you're holding a key. One would expect blood to be present on the key as well. Well, if you're driving the car Now, allegedly, the state are saying that Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey drove the Toyota RAV4 from Stephen's garage to the pit, where eventually it was found by Pam and Nicole Sturm. Well, lo and behold, the person who was actively bleeding, when they changed the gear shift, there was blood noted on the gear shift. This is on the reconstruction. When they looked at the Toyota RAV4 key, they also found blood, clear blood, was deposited on the actual key. Now, they also reproduced going under the hood, where the person was actively bleeding and they opened up the hood, because the state were alleging that Stephen Avery opened up the hood latch, so he could disconnect the car battery. When the person was actively bleeding, they also left blood on the hood latch, right? You can clearly see it in the picture. Okay, guys, let's have a look at slide number 25. Well, here's the problem. If you're actively bleeding, it means that you're dripping blood, right? So you've got an open wound and you're dripping blood. But there's one problem. The state, when they looked at the blood in the car, there was a lot of issues. The investigators did not note or find any blood on the steering wheel, the gear shift lever, the handbrake lever, the exterior door handles, the interior door handles, the hood lock release lever, the hood latch, the hood supporting rod, the battery cables and terminals. They found no blood on the number plates that were found in the Avery salvage yard, and they noted no blood on the RAV4 spare key. So it's bizarre. If you're leaving blood in the RAV4, it means you're actively bleeding. If you're actively bleeding, then why don't you find blood in all the obvious places if you're driving a car? So it seemed very inconsistent with the blood stain pattern in the Toyota RAV4. So Kathleen Zellner was able to show that the blood pattern found in the Toyota RAV4 was not, and this was agreed by Stuart James, was not consistent with someone who was actively bleeding. Blood should have been present everywhere, but it wasn't. It was found in 6 discrete places, and that's it. Okay, if we have a look at slide 26, the experts also examined the presence of blood in the cargo area. And what they noted was there was blood in discrete areas in the cargo bay of the Toyota RAV4. Now, one can immediately see there are not pools of blood. Ken Kratz gave the impression that there was blood absolutely everywhere. There is blood, but it's in discrete spots. I want you to pay a lot of attention to the back cargo door. That's the door when you open the cargo bay. It also had droplets of blood on that cargo door. And the experts were very, very interested in the distribution of the blood on that back door. If we have a look at slide 27, this is very important because Stuart James, being a blood splatter expert, he knows what type of shape blood droplets would make when they hit a surface at a specific angle. If you hit a surface at 90 degrees, you get a nice round spot. As you increase the angle of the blood hitting a surface, you get a tail because gravity will pull the blood down. So by looking at the blood in the Toyota RAV4 in the cargo area, they can determine how the blood hit the surface of a particular object like a door. If we look at slide 28, what they wanted to do was to reproduce the blood pattern on the door. This was very important because the state was saying that the blood that's present on the back door was as a result of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey grabbing Teresa Halbach and throwing her in the back of the RAV, like literally throwing her. And they're saying that the blood on the back door had come from the head wound, right? Because forensic analysis has shown that there were cranial bone fragments that had bullet holes in them. And so Ken Kratz surmised, blood in the hair, that got flung and it landed on the back of the door. So Kathleen and her experts, they got a dummy, an anatomically correct dummy of the correct same weight as Teresa Halbach, same hair length as well. And what they did is they placed blood in the hair. And initially, they got one individual to pick up the model and throw it in the back of the RAV. When they looked at the blood spots, it was not similar at all to how it appeared on the actual door. So they then took two people representing Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey. They picked up the model with the weights and they swung it into the back of the RAV4. Again, they looked at the blood spots on the door and it didn't match. It didn't match what is actually present on the door. So, in a last attempt to reproduce that pattern, they took off all the weights from the model. They grabbed the model and swung it and threw it into the back of the RAV to see if they could get that so-called spray pattern on the back door. They didn't. The pattern of blood droplets was completely different to how it was on the actual door. So guys, we're nearly done. Thank you for your patience. But if we have a look at slide 29, now we know that the victim in this case was shot at least twice in the skull. And high-speed photography shows that when a bullet traverses or hits an area that's enriched in blood, you get back and forward spatter. But if you have a look at the back spatter, it forms a fine misting pattern. So the suggestion by Ken Kratz was that, okay, the blood spray was due to maybe being shot in the skull. Stuart James said that the blood droplets that are formed, the blood flies in all directions, and the size of the blood droplets are tiny, very, very small, a fraction of a millimeter. And what you notice is when they flung the test dummy into the car, you can see the blood went in the direction of where the head went. It went from right to left, right? The problem was the droplets that were present on the actual door were round. They didn't have this elongated tail. It was round, which means that whatever caused the blood pattern on that door wasn't from someone being flung, but actually it was blood that was that landed on the door. So how could that be? This is a very important point, and I'll quote, "The impression of the original blood stains on the door," this is the back door of the RAV4, "it could not be reproduced by flinging a body with blood in the hair." So this straight away showed that the state's case of what actually happened was not what they stated in court. It was different. Something else happened to Teresa Halbach, or if you like, in this case, I can say the victim. So Stuart James looked at all the evidence, and guys, this is the final slide. Thank you for your patience. Stuart James looked at the blood staining patterns and suggested the blood is coming from a straight angle, 90 degrees. It's hitting the surface at 90 degrees. And as you can see in front of Stuart James, he has a whole variety of hammers, heavy, blunt objects. So the notion was the victim was struck in the skull with either a hammer, a tire jack, something metallic, something heavy. So what they did, Kathleen's team, was that they took a hammer, they placed blood on the hammer. And as you can see, the gentleman goes into the motion of hitting someone close to the ground, because Stuart James was able to work out the height that the victim must have been at for the blood to hit straight where the door. And you can see most of the blood droplets are concentrated in a specific area of that door, quite low. So they put blood on a hammer. They then went into the motion of striking somebody and flinging the hammer back. So in other words, you're in the motion of hitting someone in the head really hard, putting your hand back to strike again. Lo and behold, guys, the blood pattern matched. This indicated a very important point. The victim, in this case Teresa Horbach, she was struck with something blunt and heavy in the back of her own vehicle. And so that's incredible that through the use of reproducing the so-called reproducing the crime scene, and most importantly, by using forensic experts, Kathleen Zellner was able to dispel the fact that Ken Kratz said, oh no, the blood pattern stain was due to flinging the body into the back of the car. That's not correct. The blood stain pattern that we see is due to the fact that Teresa Horbach was struck, likely in the skull, with a heavy, blunt object, and the blood was projected back at 90 degrees to form the round droplets. Awesome. All right, guys, that's enough of me of gas bagging. That essentially, guys, was MAM 2, Episode 1. So, guys, we can now open it up. Do we have any questions, guys? One strand.
Dr. Silkman, having had, I also saw Martha has the same question. Having had the medical background, head wounds bleed a lot. And Ken Kratz says that there's this blood pool. I only see a small area, and to me, it would appear that she was possibly wrapped up in something and only partially that her head was out, because there doesn't seem to be enough blood in there for a live person or a gunshot
Yeah.
wound.
Yes, correct. And that's a real excellent question. The mere factor that you don't see a huge pool of blood in the back of the RAV probably means that the victim, in this case Teresa Horbach, was indeed wrapped in something, probably a tarp or something that was waterproof. Obi-Wan, do you have a question?
I wanted to try and give it like a different explanation as to why we don't see like a pool of blood. And
please,
like from my opinion, I kind of get the sense like she had to have been dead for quite some time and then tossed back in the cargo area, to where like her blood and stuff would have already like coagulated and kind of gelled up a little bit, and that's why we don't see pools of blood back there, but just basically
yes.
surface stain, as if blood was on her skin or something like that, kind of congealed and coagulated, and it just kind of like brushed the surface of the carpet.
Yes, But thank you, Obi-Wan. If you actually have a look at the back of the RAV, it looks like a mat or whatever has been removed from the back of the RAV because it's relatively clean. So if someone, and as one strand has said, and in actual fact, Kelly as well, because she's in the medical profession, and I believe Neverly is as well, if you're bleeding profusely from gunshot wounds, you're going to bleed absolutely everywhere. And it's really a lack of blood in the back of the RAV, which is of great concern. Lily, do you have a question?
Well, I have owned many minivans over the course of my life and have stored a lot of things in the back. Well,
Yes.
there's been a couple of times where they've been rusty items taken to the dump or whatever. And the on side 26, is it? Where there's nothing on the rug, it's just on the side plastic panel.
Correct.
Those to me really look like rust marks of something that had been sitting there. They don't even look like blood marks to me.
Well, according to the experts who were during the trial, well, for a start, Cherie Cohen would have swabbed that area there. And what they do, and that's an excellent question, Lily. You're right. First of all, what the forensic expert said during the trials was that the impression left on that panel was due to bloody hair coming in contact with the plastic panel. And secondly, Cherie Cohen would have done a presumptive test. So essentially, what they do is they take a swab, they test it using phenolphthalein. If it turns pink, it means that it's blood. And if that's the case, she would have taken another swab and done a DNA preparation from her. Once.
I'm thinking now that we have the magic bullet, we actually have to give Stephen credit if we were to be on the side of the prosecution that he has magic blood that would
Correct.
drip off of his hand and then turn into flakes before it hits the carpet. That isn't feasible, as well as the profuse the active bleeding. You have to be able to cover it up, and you're not going to dip little drops all over the place. That was ridiculous. And was any of this blood visible prior to the RAV being moved?
Panel, would anyone like to answer that question?
I could
Jack.
take a guess.
Go ahead, Obi.
Obi.
They said that they didn't see, nobody saw any blood, is what they stated. They even had flashlights gleaming into the window and still didn't see nothing. So
Correct. Neverly.
My callback sister said found the Rav lead form callback family. He said explicitly there's sign foul play.
Correct. Yeah, thank you guys. When I call her Pam of God, when she discovered the RAV with her daughter, they obviously went around the RAV and they admitted that they'd looked inside the RAV because they were able to see various objects inside the RAV. And they were asked very specifically. Now, remember, guys, we have a pre-trial, we have the Stephen Avery trial, and we've got the Brendan Dassey trial. So we've got 3 trials that we need to have a look at. But they were asked, did you see any blood straight out, as in any blood inside the RAV4? And I remember Nicole giving this big convoluted story. Oh, it was dark, it was misty, the clouds were low, we couldn't see very much, we couldn't see very well. Yet she took, I believe it was 6 photographs, and it was daylight. And you can see one photograph, you can actually see straight through the windows of the Toyota RAV4. And not only that, both Pam and Nicole had mentioned seeing various items inside the Toyota RAV4. So they could clearly see inside the Toyota RAV4. Not one of them mentioned, and they even admitted, they did not see any blood. But it gets better than that. And Obi-Wan alluded to the fact that several investigators, including Remiker, Fassbender, and I think there were others there as well, had flashlights. And they would have definitely checked the Toyota RAV4 with a flashlight. They would have also checked the ignition area. That's the obvious place to check because you want to see if there's a key there. Because remember, they wanted to move the Toyota RAV4 onto a flatbed truck. So they obviously were trying to see if they can get inside the Toyota RAV4. Not one person mentioned that they saw blood in the Toyota RAV4 while it was at the Avery salvage yard. And very damning, in my opinion, was the fact that the CD case was covered. 50% of the case had a blood smear on it. And no one, remember, these are trained investigators, not one of them saw any blood. Obi-Wan.
I just wanted to state that Michael Halbach stated in the news or in the media that there was no sign of foul play, and this was on, I believe, the 5th or the 6th.
No,
Was it
that
the
was
8th
the 8th.
he dated us?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you have Fassbender. There's a conversation between Fassbender and Poggle where they're already suggesting that they're looking for blood inside this RAV4. There's a conversation about it. But then on the 10th, after the key was found, on the 8th, here you have Link and Colburn never mentioning anything about blood being found on the key or the fob. But then on the 10th or the 11th, you have Remiker and Poggle stating that they had found blood on the key and in the RAV. And they mention blood. They don't state like DNA. They just say blood, specifically blood.
Correct. And also don't forget when Stephen Avery was being interrogated on November the 9th, they also mentioned blood. In actual fact, they said to him, "What's Teresa Halbach's blood doing in your trailer?" Right? So they were throwing all sorts of things to him. Jack 61.
There was a mention, and I can't tell you which date it was, that Kratz had made a statement to the media after the fact that they had knew that there was blood in the RAV, but he didn't really quantify that, and there really was nothing. So it was a self-serving statement in my opinion.
Correct. The impression that Ken Kratz was saying was that there were pools of blood, right? Pools of blood. K9, do you have a comment?
If that were, yes, I do. If that were the case, and Stephen had an active bleeding on that day, and Teresa Halbach was shot in the head and then thrown in the back of the RAV, where is Stephen Avery's blood in the back of the RAV mixed together with Teresa Halbach's blood? And where is Teresa Halbach's blood in the front of the RAV mixed with Stephen Avery's blood? There's just none.
Yes. Thank you, K9. Look, Spooky 67, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that she was shot twice.
They found cranial bone fragments with evidence of being shot twice in the skull. However, Brendan Dassey, when he was interrogated, I think it was on March the 1st, said that Teresa Halbach was shot, I believe, 10 times. 10. So, and also she had her throat cut and was stabbed in the stomach as well. So one would have expected to be torrents of blood absolutely everywhere. Obi-Wan.
I wanted to note that they also stated that they seen a micro SD card in the back part of the RAV4 through a tinted window, and that they could read Teresa's name off that micro SD card, yet they can't see blood through a non-tinted window, and it just makes no sense. That was Jamie Sam William Henry number plate. He stated that before.
Yes.
I found it hilarious.
Yep. Oh no, awesome. I mean, it's rather embarrassing that you've got both lay people and also trained investigators with torches. They've obviously been to cars before. They know what to search for. They know what to look for. The mere fact that no one had made any comment regarding blood is a real worry. You can see that on one of the panels at the back, there appears to be quite a large quantity of blood, not pools of blood, but it's pretty obvious if you look at slide 26. You can see that there is blood at the back of the RAV. With a torch, you should be able to see it, no problems at all. And of course, we know that the Toyota RAV4 was eventually taken from the property, and then it arrived at the crime lab. But as people have stated before, there appears to be like a missing hour somewhere. That journey from the Avery salvage yard to the crime lab took more than an hour than what it should have. So something is not making sense here. Furthermore, K9 made a very important point just in a sec, and that is, and this also stunned the investigators, the experts, there's no mixing of blood. You have 6 droplets of apparently Stephen Avery's blood at the front of the RAV, and you've got droplets of blood and blood stains at the back of the RAV that belong to Teresa Halbach. What you don't find in any case is a mixing of the bloods, right? Now, if Stephen Avery was actively bleeding, one would have expected there to be blood of his at the back. And K9 said an excellent point. If Teresa Halbach was actively bleeding as well because she had been shot and stabbed, it's likely that they would have got blood on their clothing and hands, and you would have expected blood to be present in the front of the RAV that belonged to Teresa Halbach. You do not find that. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
I was just going to say that, Dr. Silkman, that it seems that Stephen's clothing was never discussed. There was nothing to point to Stephen's clothing having blood. Even for Brandon, they only had a bleach stain.
Correct.
But never blood.
Correct.
And there's a comment from Glenn McGlynn in chat that says, would the blood splatter on the cargo door also be at the right angle and be a similar pattern if someone had kneeled down and blooded it? What do you think, Doctor?
Well, according to Stuart James, thank you, Neverly. The way the blood was positioned on that rear back door is highly suggestive that someone was kneeling down and were bludgeoned with a heavy metal, likely a heavy metal object, and by swinging that object back to hit Teresa Halbach again in the skull, blood was flung back. And it's not from a gunshot, because from a gunshot wound, the blood that's sprayed out are micro droplets, much smaller droplet sizes. That's not what you see on that back door. Jack. Jack 61, do you have a comment?
Just real quick, I think that we have to, and we've talked about it before, I know everybody has, but just looking through the case file, Kratz implicated throughout the investigation, as did others, and then it was also really implied that she was shot, but he was careful about his wording.
Yes.
So given that, I think he intentionally, and he actually did it pretty well. He made the implication and made it stick without he actually had his other people say it for him and not say it himself. So that's it. That's my comment.
Yes. Bibi, do you have a comment?
He said it slyly, like to make the perception of that.
Correct. And he said it very early on as well, that there were pools of blood in the back. Now, correct, in the back of the RAV4. So if one thinks about it, you can actually work out the volume of blood that's in the front of the RAV4. And I calculated it to be between 300 to 600 microliters. That's around about half a mil. I think, Kelly, you must be echoing. Kelly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say the one place that Teresa's blood should have been, and that should have been on the floor of her RAV4, because if Stephen or Brennan had shot her, her blood would have been pooling everywhere. They would have walked over that blood. That would have been deposited on their feet or their shoes, and when they got into that car, the floor would have had contamination of her blood. There is just no way around it. You can't tippy-toe around blood on the floor. You just can't do it when you're moving a body.
Correct. Thank you, Kelly. Well, now you know why Kathleen Zellner hired all these experts to have a look at the crime scene. The crime scene, which is the Toyota RAV4, does not make any sense whatsoever. One Strand, do you have a comment?
Yes, Dr. Silkman. The one thing I after watching the first episode again, the way that ignition was facing, it wasn't a standard ignition that is over to the side. It actually faced more towards the front.
Yes.
And when you take your key, you go straight in. You don't put your hand to the side with a key like that, which would have totally been impossible for him to come in contact with that.
Correct. Kathleen actually measured that distance, and it was 2 inches. So your hand doesn't actually come in contact with that surface at all. But the amazing thing is that through the use of experts, through the use of reconstructions, Kathleen Zellner was able to deconstruct the blood that was in the Toyota RAV4. This is something that Dean Strang and Jerome Buting did not do, unfortunately. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, Tracy Bowman says, was there a full DNA of TH in the back of RAV4?
Correct. Yes, there was. Cherie Culhane had swabbed. Now, the important point is this. She didn't swab or sample all the blood spots. She only sampled a few of them. And there was a full genomic DNA profile that matched now we talked about this last week, the so-called intimate sample, which was the pap smear. So when a DNA was extracted from the blood, from blood spots at the back of the Toyota RAV4, it was 100% match with the pap smear. Also, don't forget, guys, there was a Cherry Pepsi Cola can at the front of the Toyota RAV4. And when that was swabbed for saliva, that also gave a full genomic profile that matched 100% with the pap smear. So we have saliva and blood from the Toyota RAV4, 100% match with the pap smear. Lily, do you have...
I thought they only got a partial off the pap smear. They never
No.
really. Oh.
No, the pap smear, that misconception unfortunately came in a report. where they said
Oh,
partial profile. The actual
okay.
yeah, I've gone through it with a fine tooth comb.
Oh, yeah.
All the loci came up in the pap smear. It's a full genomic profile. The only one that gave a partial profile, guys, was item BZ, which was the charred muscle tissue on the bone. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Kim was saying about the no mixture of DNA or blood between Stephen and Teresa, and I really don't hear this mentioned a lot. I know that people have talked about the dried blood, the flaking of blood, but you literally have Teresa's blood down on the surface, dried, and then you have Stephen Avery's chipped, brittle pieces of blood laying directly on top of hers without mixing. That's what, and I don't hear many people like discuss and talk about how it actually is like laid out.
Yes,
Can you
yes.
explain anything of that?
Well, you're right. If you treat a car to make it waterproof, you should normally treat the entire car. So why is the blood in the back of the RAV not forming flakes, whereas there's a couple of droplets at the front of the RAV that were recovered as flakes? So flakes basically means that the blood itself has dried out, right? And has now formed a crust. But what is interesting was that, and we'll talk about this in a later episode, when they allowed blood to dry on the sink that was taken from Stephen Avery's house, the trailer, when it dried, it also formed flakes, right? Crusty, dried blood. So that's very interesting. So the only comment is if you're going to form a flake, the blood itself has to dry to form a flake. But if that's the case, why don't you see flakes in the back of the Toyota RAV4 where there appears to be blood on the carpet as well? So it is very strange indeed. Lily, do you have a comment?
Well, I wanted to comment about the blood splatter would have been, on the clothes if it had been a gunshot type of deal. Back in 85 with the Penny case, they even took his clothes to test for spores and for
Correct.
the foliage of the beach area and stuff, and they didn't find any on his clothes.
Correct.
But we don't hear that I'm aware of so far that they grabbed any of his clothes this time around at all.
Well, he would be the state's argument that time to clean up. So
It would
their argument would
not
be,
don't
well, of
bother.
course we did. Yeah, of course we didn't find any blood because they were actively laundering their clothes, right? And yet, when one thinks about it, does Brendan Dassey get rid of the jeans? Of course not. Of course not. Right? So it's quite clear that they didn't take off all their clothes and they burnt them or whatever like that. They just carried on as normal because, guys, I personally believe that Teresa Halbach was definitely not killed at the Avery salvage yard. But getting back to that back door, the investigators, they made an error about how that blood got on the back door. They thought it was from swinging Teresa Halbach into the back of the Toyota RAV4 and the blood flung off and hit the back door. That clearly is not the case because the blood droplets would have gone from right to left. They would have left a trail. The blood droplet on the back of the door is straight, a circle. And Kathleen Zellner was able to reproduce that blood pattern as blood being projected from a blunt, heavy object. Now, the reason why I bring that up is that Brendan never, ever mentions striking Teresa Halbach in the skull with a heavy metal object. So straight away, We know that Brendan Dassey never stated that because he was never there. No crime took place. But that's, you see, Kathleen Zellner's strategy by weakening the case that the state has presented. Lily, do you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say also with those splatters on the back door, it wasn't, if she was bludgeoned on the head, it wasn't that close to the door. She was a distance away, because if she had been very close, it would have been big blotches and a lot more of it.
Correct. Yep,
But
correct. But the incredible thing is that Stuart James was able to work out that she had to be close enough so that the projection of the blood droplets was relatively straight.
right,
But there
right,
was no
yes.
arch in the blood droplets. So when she got struck in the skull, presumably the skull, because that'd be a rich source of blood, especially being bludgeoned, she had to be fairly close to the back door, but low. She could have been hit or pushed to the ground or whatever, but from the angle that the blood hit, she had to be either kneeling or close to the ground. But the scary thing is, it appears that she got bludgeoned, likely on the skull. Jack 61, do you have a comment?
Not to drive too far off the reservation, but there's and I want to say it's from Nick Stahl from the Wisconsin Crime Lab, and his bench notes, I think it's him. It's been a while, but this just occurred to me because talking about the blood in the cargo area, the cargo door, but in his notes, he talks about some, and I'm going to say it was blood spots up near where the parking lot was found, the one that got popped out of the front of the RAV.
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that's going to be discussed at a later date.
Yes.
Okay. I just thought of that, and it just occurred to me that it really isn't mentioned really at all, but it's there. It's in his notes.
Yes. In fact, in next week's episode, we'll be discussing that light, the blinker light that's in the back of the RAV4, and that's going to play a very important role. And Kathleen Zellner wants to get her hands on the RAV4 and also on that blinker light, but we'll discuss that in the next episode. So yeah, we've got clearly through the use of reproduction, doing a model, the way the state presented how that blood got on that door is incorrect. It was not from swinging a body or Teresa into the back of the RAV. It likely was from her being bludgeoned with a heavy metal object. And correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't the investigators trying to find some type of tool that was missing from Teresa Horbach?
Yes.
Jack, Jack 61. And normally
it was a tire tool or something out of her toolkit, I think.
Yes. And a tire lever itself is metallic and pretty heavy, and you definitely don't want to be hitting the skull with one of those. BB.
I believe it was a tire iron or a tire wrench or
right.
And you want to call it.
Yes. Does anyone on the panel? Yes. Does anyone on the panel know whether it was found?
I'm going to say it wasn't, but don't hold me to that.
To the best of my knowledge, it was not.
Right.
They do have a bag there, but it is missing from the bag in the contents.
Right. Okay. So, we may have a simple ruse whereby Teresa could have been flagged down by simply saying, "Oh, you've got a flat tire," forcing her to stop, get out of the vehicle, and bang, she was surprised and struck in the skull. So that's a potential scenario of how you can get Teresa Horbach out of her vehicle. K9, do you have a comment?
Well, just in thinking about the back door, I remember that Millbilly had said something along the lines of looking at like how maybe well, first of all, they were like an hour over the time that they were supposed to have been to the Wisconsin
Correct.
crime lab.
Correct.
And my I don't know that I don't know this for a fact, but and I believe in reading through queso, they stopped to readjust some barrels that had gotten loose.
Yes.
But what's to say? Well, first of all, we don't know where her blood came from. If that, in fact, it is her blood. I mean, it is her blood in the back. And if she's not deceased, then where did that blood come from? How was it obtained? And then didn't they have time enough to just pop that thing off the back door, lay it down, sling some blood on it, pop it back on, shut the door, and drive? They say they never opened the RAV, but I have a funny feeling that with the Slim Jim, somehow or other, they got into that RAV.
Yes. It's very likely that they did get into the RAV. And the ridiculous thing, of course, is that when they examined the RAV on the Avery salvage yard, even Nicole and Pam, they tried to open the doors. They said that they utilized tissues or their sleeves to try the doors. And the RAV4 was definitely shut. All the doors were shut. However, I think it was Groffy when he went to the crime lab on the Sunday to take photographs, to start taking photographs. Lo and behold, the driver's side door is unlocked. So someone forgot to lock the door after getting into the RAV. I do believe that opened up the RAV. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it was closer to almost 2 hours or slightly over 2 hours, that extra time it took to get to the crime lab.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I
she's
think you're
right.
being way too generous. Yeah, I think it was much longer. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So remember, guys, to actually plant that blood, or in actual fact, bloods, if we're looking at Teresa Horbach's blood in the back of the RAV, you're looking at about 5 minutes. And I think a lot of people have made the comment, I know that Millbilly has, that those panels look like they've been taken out. So, and I know we're talking about something slightly off topic about whether there's one RAV or two RAVs, but potentially what you can do is take panels out of Teresa Horbach's RAV that have got blood on it and transplant them into this RAV. Because it looks like, if you look at the RAV4, it looks like the panels have been removed and put back in. So the RAV4 that we see here is a reconstruction. And if you look at the back of the RAV on slide 26, you can see that it appears that the carpet itself has been pulled up on the right-hand corner up on top. You can see the ridge line as though it's been pulled back. So one way of creating this crime scene is by taking out the panels from Teresa's RAV and placing them in this RAV. So it's almost like a hybrid RAV4, whereby you can set up the entire crime scene very, very quickly. And if you notice, the amount of blood that you find in the RAV4 at the front is minimal. There's 6 drops of blood. That works out to be less than half a mil. And I think there was a question, I think one strand asked it about the amount of blood that's present in a tube. Normally when a nurse or someone takes blood, they normally fill up the tube right up to the top. It's under vacuum. It's around about 10 mils. When the FBI examined the blood vial, because they did EDTA testing, there was around about 5 mils in that tube. And someone clearly had opened up the top because air got in the tube, and you can see it's forming like a crust layer around the top of the purple top. Someone had opened up the tube. Okay, Bibi, do you have a comment?
In the back end, it only looks like a tube or two at best of blood in there.
Probably less. Yeah, there's not a huge amount of blood. K9, do you have a... Thank you, Bibi. K9, do you have a comment?
Well, and another thing, if Teresa was shot in the head twice and it was an active bleed and she was slung, not placed, in the back of the RAV, wouldn't there be blood like on the back of the seats, on the window, on the headliner of the back of the RAV? I mean, an active head bleed, golly, that's like a lot of blood, and you see
Yes.
very, very, very little.
The thing that strikes me, now, I've never examined a vehicle in which violence has taken place, thank God. But to me, what makes me very suspicious is that the RAV4 itself is too clean. It doesn't indicate to me horrendous violence having taken place inside the RAV, and people have made the comment that Mike Hallbach said, oh, thank God there's no sign of foul play in the Toyota RAV4. There's hope that she's alive. The RAV4 itself looks staged, as in the whole purpose was, one, to put the Toyota RAV4 from the victim on the Avery salvage yard, which means that you can get search warrants, etc., etc. You can bring in all the investigators. And secondly, you plant the blood. Now, could Teresa's blood be planted in there as well? Could it be transplanted from her vehicle into this vehicle? So you've got like a hybrid RAV. That's entirely possible. It's very, very suspicious. But we mustn't forget, there's two other sources of blood that we know about. There's CX, which was blood found at the quarry. And at the quarry, that's where bones were found as well. But most damning of all of them was A23. A23 was actually blood present on the back door of the RAV where you open it, the latch. So therefore, what is blood doing on that latch? That blood obviously can't be Teresa's, because otherwise Culhane would have said so. And it doesn't match Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey. So if we look at it from a forensic point of view, there are 3 genomic profiles on that RAV or in the RAV. Stephen Avery's, Teresa Hallbach's, and A23. And none of them are a mixture, right? So the key question is this: who left A23, right? And remember, if you have to open up the back door to put in a person, a body, a victim. So clearly, if it's not Stephen's, if it's not Brendan's, if it's not Teresa Hallbach's, who was bleeding and left their blood on the door latch? Has the state actually done a re-extraction of A23? Nope, not that we know of. Has the state actually run A23 through coders? Not that we know of. Would Kathleen Zellner like to get A23 and CX examined again? Yes, she does. Jack, do you have a comment?
Just a quick comment to add to the bloodstains in the back of the RAV. A13 on the SD memory card. A13.
Correct. And Cherie Culhane actually admitted that she didn't extract DNA from all the samples. So there could well be another genomic profile in that RAV, right? Now, of course, if you own a car, you bring it to a service station, you get petrol, you get servicing done. People are going to be touching it all over the place. And my understanding is that they got 8 sets of fingerprints, none of which belong to Stephen or Brendan. So who do these prints belong to? If you look at and we'll discuss this later on, if you have a look at the back of the RAV, there are clear fingerprints or fingertips on the cover of the wheel, the spare wheel. But unfortunately, they couldn't do lifts. So if someone stopped Teresa Halbach as a ruse to say, oh, look, you better stop, you've got a flat tire, it could well be Teresa that could have been taken off the plastic cover to her wheel. And she could have been hit in the head, stumbled, fell down to the back of the RAV, and then hit again multiple times. So that is indeed a possible scenario. But if she was struck in the skull somewhere, there must be blood on the road or wherever. And that's why the dog tracks are so important. If they're smelling her scent, where did those dogs go? And the good thing is, guys, in next week's episode, we have a look at all of that forensic evidence. So trying to tie it all together. So the important thing here, guys, is that the blood in the RAV is separate. You have Stephen Avery's as 6 droplets of blood at the front of the RAV. You have droplets and little pools of blood, tiny pools of blood that belong to Teresa Halbach at the back of the RAV. There is no mixing of that blood. Also, when the key was examined by Cherie Culhane, no blood was spotted on that key. And as we all know from MAM 1, when a swab was done from the key, only one genomic profile came up, Stephen Avery's. The actual owner of the key, Teresa Halbach, none of her DNA came up at all, anywhere on that key. When the gentleman with a bleeding finger tried to start the car, etc., because he was actively bleeding, blood was noted on the key. So the state's scenario makes no sense at all, guys. It really doesn't. The RAV4 looks highly staged. Guys, what do you think? BB.
Well, when they had him open the door, the blood wound up under the door opener. That would be
Correct.
one of the first things you'd have to do to get in,
Correct.
So.
And correct. And the amazing thing is, there's an actual image where the news reporters go to the Avery salvage yard and talk to Stephen Avery. This was very, very early in the piece. I think it was November the 3rd or 4th. And Stephen Avery uses his right hand to open up the door latch of the van. And you can see it. He uses his hand, his right hand. Obviously, his cut has been scabbed over. He uses his right hand to open up the door latch. Right now, some guilters say, oh, well, he used his left hand. Well, if he used his left hand, the obvious weakness of that argument is that means that Stephen Avery was conscious that he was bleeding, right? Because he used his other hand. If that's the case, why wouldn't Stephen Avery simply use bleach and a rag to clean off all his blood inside the Toyota RAV4? Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, I do. In regards to the blood found or lack of blood found in the RAV, let's look at the Stephen's car, the Grand Am. There was plenty of blood over there in all the right places where one would expect to see blood from bleeding hand, which is the steering wheel, which is the gear shifter, which is the panel around it, and none of that was seen in the RAV.
Correct. And
exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, sorry, Lily. Yes. Comment. What's your comment?
Well, just real quick, just that simple fact. Yeah, look, the blood was everywhere in his Grand Am. And if it wasn't the old switcheroo that you did a video on, Dr. Silkman, then
yes,
I think that it was just a printed out, they put in a computer that it was, this, and they printed the paper out. I don't even
Oh,
think they tested it
yeah,
if they didn't do that switch. Yeah.
there's no question about it. You can easily type in anything into the computer, and all you need to do is instead of saying Grand Am, you say Toyota RAV4. And so when the computer spits out the results and gives a genomic DNA profile, you say, oh, look, they're from these swabs in the RAV4. But in actual fact, they're from swabs from the Grand Am or the garage or his trailer. You don't know. But then everything channeled through one person. And I keep on emphasizing this. Cherie Culhane, she did the swabbing. She did the swabbing of the Toyota RAV4. She also did the swabbing of the Grand Am, Stephen Avery's Grand Am. How convenient that Stephen actually was actively bleeding in the Grand Am. And so, as Neverly pointed out, there's blood everywhere. He also bled, I believe, in his black truck, four-wheel drive, and there are blood droplets all over the place. And there's no flakes. The blood has absorbed in the carpet. And there are photographs of that as well in evidence. So the Toyota RAV4 is very unusual. For some unknown reason, Stephen Avery bled differently in the Toyota RAV4 as compared to the Grand Am. One Strand, do you have a comment?
I think one of the most important things about this whole case in general, for the truthers and for the defense, is all the different eyes that are looking at this and all the things that are coming out because of those eyes. I'm praying that they make an impact on how crime scenes and defense, or I'm sorry, prosecution cases are handled even after Stephen's exonerated.
Correct. The thing that, thank you, One Strand. The thing that is striking is a lack of proper crime scene documentation. And what I mean by that is photographic or video evidence. And we see that everywhere in this case. Now, clearly, the investigators took thousands of photographs. 99% of them have got nothing to do with the case. If they saw a flower, if they saw a rock, if they saw a toy, they photographed it. But the critical photographs, i.e., the fire pit, the burn pit, the bones, the actual taking of the swabs, there's nothing unless there are photographs that they're hiding and not presenting. You look at Cuss Road. Cuss Road is a black hole. There's nothing about Cuss Road. They've secreted it. They've suppressed it. You know nothing about Cuss Road. Why? Right? So, as One Strand was saying, it's really a lack of proper crime scene documentation that makes people ask hard questions. And I believe Kathleen Zellner has got all her questions lined up, and it's going to prove very embarrassing for the state. Jack 61, do you have a comment?
You were talking about how the RAV4, the potential of it being staged. Looking at, if we step back to, let's just start at where Hanstern found the RAV. That whole scenario really stood out to me very early on, and the length of time that it actually took her to get from where she parked her vehicle, the town that she actually found the RAV. Then that was, around 10:30, whatever, 10:30 in the morning. Cops show up, and that RAV sits there for hours, like hours before it's moved.
Correct.
They didn't do anything. Well, they did. They put that whatever tarp over it allegedly, and we don't know what the hell happened there. So then from that, it still sits there for hours more, and then it takes longer for it to get to its destination than it should by, a couple of hours. That all comes down to me, and it's not reasonable to me at all.
No.
Then when it gets to the lab, finally, we still don't know who opened it. We don't know who unlocked it. Allegedly, if it was actually even locked when it got there, I've come to believe that it probably wasn't. But again, we just have to go with what we know. Who opened it? They never supplied.
No.
Okay, and who from law enforcement was there? I'm not talking about crime lab people. I'm talking about cops were there, recording whatever was going on. To me, it's just not reasonable. This is the single biggest piece of star evidence, I guess, from that standpoint, the state has, and we have nothing.
Correct. My understanding is I don't think Kathleen Zellner has actually got her hands on that RAV4. And quite clearly, this is going to be a treasure trove of potential forensic evidence. But what is disturbing is that the FBI took the RAV4 apart. They took all the seats out and this photographic evidence. What on earth are the FBI going in there with a laser scanner taking the RAV4 apart, right? The RAV4 itself is the crime scene, right? It's a critical piece of crime scene evidence. The FBI went in there, scanned it apparently for fingerprints using a laser scanner. They obviously didn't find Stephen Avery's or Brendan Dassey's fingerprints anywhere in that RAV, otherwise they would have said so. So you've got this real bizarre situation whereby you've got a RAV4 that's blue, right? On every missing poster description, and including Karen, the mother, said the RAV was dark green. So you go from a dark green RAV to a blue one. It's definitely blue. So when Pam Sturm encountered the RAV4, she was shocked. And you could see that, hear that on her voice when she was speaking to Sheriff Pagel. And she gave the subtle hint that, I found the blue one. What's happening here, guys? Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
See, I don't know. Like the way that I look at it is that the vehicle was blue, and that the family knew exactly what color that vehicle was. So for them to have lied and stated that it was a green one obviously says something. Either they wanted people to look for the wrong RAV4.
Yes.
And it's that way when people are looking for the wrong RAV4, police have every opportunity and time to get that RAV4 snuck onto the property without somebody spotting them, because they wouldn't be looking at that RAV4. They would be looking for a clean RAV4. But Kratz tried to correct that at trial and tried to get everybody to swap and change the color of the RAV4 to blue. Yes.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And it's like real bizarre because he actually said all three colors: green, blue, mystic teal. And you're thinking, wait a minute, the car has to be one color. It can't be all three. And it was obvious that when Pam encountered the RAV4, she was taken aback. She was looking for a dark green one and she discovered a blue one, right? So there's been a lot of controversy about how many RAVs, the color of the RAV, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it is very controversial. Jack, do you have a comment?
Just directly to your point, it is clear in her phone call that she's confused when she's talking to Poggle or Uyghur, whichever one. There was obvious confusion in her voice. It's like, I found the RAV, but something's not looking right here. And that's what I got out of it immediately. And I didn't put a lot of weight into that at first, but she was obviously trying to resolve herself to say, okay, well, this is Teresa's RAV, and give me the, she goes on about the vent and all that. So anyway, that was
Correct.
my comment.
Correct. But thank you. Neverly, do you have a comment?
Just to add to what Jax just said, and she even pushed Uyghur to say, is this the car? Is this the car? And he was like, shut up, I can't tell you. Like, go away.
But if you listen to the phone call, she actually chuckles. Pam Sturm actually chuckles. Now you think about it, right? How can she be chuckling at such a discovery of potentially her own cousin is dead? She chuckles and demands, well, is this the RAV4? Have I found the right one? Which was very bizarre. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Well, when listening to the audio, I kind of got the impression that the conversation was just like well orchestrated. I think that they screwed up and they realized that they made a mistake, but to me it was definitely orchestrated. I just think that people forgot their parts.
Correct. I think Obi-Wan, you've hit the nail on the head. It was a script, right? So remember, they did a flyover, and Pagel was in the aeroplane that flew over on the 4th, and they interviewed the pilot because he appeared in the trial. No one spoke to the pilot. They all kept their mouth shut. So potentially, if they found the RAV on the property on the 4th, they never said a word, or potentially they were looking for a spot to plant the RAV. So from the air, you can see all the roads, you can see the entrance ways, the exit ways. You can clearly see how you can put a RAV4. And just importantly, what you find is, and very highly suspiciously, you find the RAV4 and the number plates all on the periphery of the salvage yard. In other words, someone coming in and someone going out. You don't find the number plates buried deep inside the salvage yard, right? You find them on the periphery, which means you can easily get in, easily get out, right? And in next week's episode, Kathleen Zellner actually gives a very strong case on exactly how that RAV4 got on where the pit is. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, Dr. Silkman, in regards to the flyover, how many hours did they spend in the air? Like 3, 4, 5 hours?
I think it was several hours, but they didn't just stay over the salvage yard. They went everywhere. So they were obviously looking for the presence of a Toyota RAV4, the victim's vehicle, everywhere. And the pilot said, we looked at ditches, we looked at garage. They went everywhere. Green Bay, I think they flew over. They did an extensive search. No one said a word. Obi-Wan. Thank you, Neville.
Yeah, I think they went
and one more thing.
Vicinity, like
sorry.
they were. Oh,
I just
they were
want
like
to.
in.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
Never.
Okay. Just out of the, I think 2-day search on the 4th and the 5th, how many hours did they have of tape? Yet they gave the defense 3 or 4 minutes.
Correct. That there would have been several hours. I remember Millbilly discussing this. There were several hours of tape, but they only presented, I think it was 25 minutes or something like that. It's heavily edited. So whatever
But that's
information
legal if you're in Manitoba.
Correct. They should have handed over all the raw information, but they clearly, if that RAV4 was spotted on the 4th, they may have edited it out or cut it out. We don't know.
Because there's nothing to see, right?
Correct. There's nothing to see, and yet magically it appears on the 5th. Thank you, Neverly. Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I think they did fly all over the place. They went to, Mishcot. They went over to Maribel, down to Green Bay. I mean, they did travel extensively, but they did record over, I believe it was the 4th. But I wanted to ask something. Since the news crew was up in the air, which that's what they stated, right? Wouldn't they have some type of record or copy of some type of video that they would have had. I wonder if
Oh,
like
I'm
anybody
sure.
has even
Yeah,
contacted them to see if they had footage
yeah,
of
yeah,
flyover on the 4th.
yeah. Look, I'm sure there would have been news helicopters everywhere, and the main focus, especially on the 5th, would have been the Avery salvage yard. So there could have been footage taken before the 5th. So yeah, to subpoena all of that information would be awesome. Jack 61.
Yeah, as far as I know, that I've been told that Drum is the one that took him up on the 4th, which was Poggle and Wendy Baldwin. But
Correct.
also, to my knowledge, we do not know for positive where the footage from the 5th came from, and it's clearly different. The sound is different, so we don't know where that came
Yes.
from. They've never said.
Yes, but it also could have been footage from either the news or it could have been footage from a helicopter as well, because there's definitely footage that shows the Toyota RAV4 under a hood. Because the image is so stable, it's likely from a helicopter as opposed to an aeroplane. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
There is two distinct sounds that you can hear, and you can also make out the utility of the vehicle while it's in the air. One is a plane, and the other one is specifically a helicopter. You can make
Correct.
out it's a helicopter. So there are two
Correct.
different events up there,
Correct.
transpiring.
Yeah, in actual fact, you can actually see in one of the footage the leg of the helicopter, the actual what it lands on. So it's definitely a helicopter. The image is much more stable. Plus, we know there's a helicopter there because of the incredible imagery taken at Cuss Road. So there's been a helicopter flying around for hours and hours taking aerial photographs around the deer camp and Cuss Road. The main focus is away from the salvage yard, not actually on the salvage yard, and that's pretty damning in itself. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Well, remember they brought in, what was it, Eagle 3 or something?
Correct.
And that was a helicopter from a rescue.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there were plenty of rescue teams, and I think Bibi and some other researchers have shown that on the 5th, everyone but the kitchen sink was at the Avery salvage yard. It was a huge turnout, and I read or saw that there were 3 DAs. Now, excuse me if I'm wrong, but how many DAs came out searching for Christine Rudy? Bibi,
None.
do you know how many people
one.
went out? And now this was a pregnant girl left on the side of the road in the middle of winter, and you don't see any response like this at all. Whereas with the salvage yard, for some unknown reason, well, I think we all know, there was a massive response, huge. And it does appear, and Obi-Wan said it does appear to be all pre-planned, which is just amazing.
Yes, it does.
It does appear to be pre-planned. K9, do you have a comment?
Well, I know that when we FOIA'd the flyover from Calumet, we were in hopes that we would get the whole 4.5, 5 hours. And basically what we got back was the 12 minutes.
Yes.
And during that, when we got that back, I sat down and went frame by frame. And if you do that and slow it down and go frame by frame, you can actually see, if you remember in the very beginning, I don't know who it was that was talking, maybe Wiegert, whatever, said, oh, well, we can do this and we can cut out whatever we want. And it shows a whiteboard and maybe some kind of a table.
That's right.
In one of those cuts where they cut a piece of it out, you can see that split right there, and you can see that whiteboard, and you can see that I don't know if it's a table or a cabinet. So it's definitely been cut more than, and there's more than one. There's probably about 5, I think. So
Yes, yes. Yeah, there's no doubt the footage has been heavily edited. So that's damning in itself, because is there information on those video that points to somebody else and not to Stephen Avery? So there's clearly the footage has been spliced, and it'll be very, very interesting to find out why. But we may never get to see that footage. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Well, I just was listening to Kim, and she said something about a cabinet. What cabinet are you talking about that you see in there? Is that the cabinet from Bree's bedroom?
no, it's in the very beginning of the video. It shows I think it's Dvorak sitting there, and there's a whiteboard, and or it looked like Dvorak, and I believe Wiegert's talking to somebody about how you can roll the footage and how you can take out whatever you want. It's a whiteboard in an office. There's an
Right.
office desk, but then there's another, like, it looks like a wooden cabinet type thing, just the
Okay.
side of it. That's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah. If I could just say, Millbilly in the comments said that he was discussing how to remove timestamps, and that Uyghur was talking to Tyson. Thank you, Millbilly, for that. So yeah, I mean, these
Okay,
guys,
thanks.
these guys were already talking about how to manipulate the imagery already. So yeah, that's very suspicious. Neverly, do you have a comment?
They're really good about manipulation, removing, splicing, and editing. It seems like they completely lost, what did I say? November 4th to like a Sheriff's Department CAD phone calls, because there's
Yes.
nothing there.
Yes.
We have no phone calls from Manitowoc on the 4th.
Yes. Yes.
None.
Oh,
Nothing to
yes.
see there either.
Yeah, and that's highly suspicious in itself. And in next week's episode, we're going to be talking a lot more about the RAV and where it likely came from. And it's very, very interesting, because Fassbender actually tells Stephen Avery during an interrogation how he believes that the RAV4 got to where it is. And the interesting thing, of course, this was before Brendan Dassey was even thought about. So it's amazing that Fassbender disclosed critical information to Stephen Avery, but then all came unstuck when he had spoken with Brendan Dassey and Brendan Dassey so-called confession. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we have a Carol Davis. This is her first time here, and she said,
lovely.
I talk to Stephen about every 2 weeks, and he wants to tell you all thank you for all your private investigation. So I just wanted to welcome her here, and I was encouraging everyone to at least type in their state or country where they're from to let her see all the loving support she's got here, for Stephen.
Oh, that's super. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm from Australia myself, Carol. So yeah, I mean, people from all around the world are very interested in this case. That is for sure. Thank you so much for that, Sammy. Lily, do you have a comment?
Well, I watched episode 1 today, and at the end, Kathleen was talking about the gross, extreme, egregious prosecutorial
Correct. That's a mouthful.
conduct, and the demonstrably false stuff
Correct.
that was going on from the prosecution side. You could kind of feel the emanation of disgust from her.
Correct. Correct.
And
yes.
Yeah, I feel
and
bad
also,
for the guys. Once she gets her
yes,
foot in the door, they're
correct. Correct. And also, don't forget her fantastic gesture when she says, I would love to unmask Ken Kratz. And I
Oh,
thought,
yeah.
you ripper. And of course,
It will be a
the
pleasure to unmask Mr. Kratz. Oh,
well,
bam! I love it.
correct. But the amazing thing is that Ken Kratz, he's like a moth to a flame. He can't actually help himself. He's taking snide and making snide remarks against Kathleen Zellner. I think he called her Chapstick Susie, right? And I'm thinking to myself, now, why would you want to do that, Ken? Why do you want to, poke a bear? And I had the unfortunate experience, and same with Christy, of reading Ken Kratz's book. And Ken Kratz openly criticizes Kathleen Zellner and her team of experts. Well, Ken Kratz, my message to you, buy a new suit, because I am absolutely convinced that Kathleen Zellner is going to put you on the stand. And boy, we're going to love to see you sweat, put it that way. All right, guys. Now, I'm conscious of the time. I never thought we were going to go for 2 hours, but do we have any final comments here? Any final comments? Are people enjoying the podcast today?
Yes,
Sammy?
they are.
Awesome.
Yes.
Totally awesome. And thank you.
A lot of interaction and a lot of people showing their support. So thank you,
Super.
Carol. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Super. Yeah, someone made the comment that Ken Kratz has disappeared from Twitter. Yes. I think they know that the ship is going to hit the iceberg and everyone is disappearing like super quick. So, yeah, let's hope I think it's March the 27th. The state needs to do a response. They may even ask for another extension. I don't know. But it's all coming together quite nicely. Jack, do you have a comment?
Just before we get out, that with Tiffany Winters walking away, AG Tiffany Winters walking away, it'll be interesting to find out if she's actually left the AAG's office and taken a private position, or if she just wanted off the case. And to me, it is really important to know the difference between the two. If she just simply was stayed in the office as an AAG and said, I want off the case, to me, that raises questions in my mind. If she took a job in private practice that she just couldn't resist the amount of money somebody threw at her, that's a different matter. That's a life decision.
Correct.
So that'll be interesting to see. Plus, on top of that, we see that, of course, you did mention that Kratz and his very young wife had left Twitter, apparently.
Correct.
But it is, I'm pretty sure that I found an alt of his. So he's not gone. He's just under a different name.
Yes. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, in response to Carol Davis, who said that she's talking to Stephen every other week and we sent our regards to him. I just wanted to point out that there's pretty much the whole world is watching, the whole world is supporting Stephen Avery. And to me, that's really, really important emotional support. I believe in that. So we have people from Ireland, we have people from Michigan, we have from Canada, Wisconsin, of course, Serbia, Utah, Washington, South Dakota, Chicago, again, Michigan. Isn't that wonderful?
That's awesome. And Australia, and don't forget
And
Australia too.
Of course, Australia.
Yeah, and I mean, that's completely awesome. So again, guys, with this particular episode, I am conscious of the time where we've done a real lot. This is just one episode. But what I wanted to do in this particular podcast, in this series, is to focus on the forensic evidence. So that means that even with new people who are new to the case, you can see Kathleen Zellner's approach. Kathleen Zellner did not waste any time. She got herself a car, a Toyota RAV4. She got herself surrounded by experts, and it's let me just say, the way the state has treated Kathleen Zellner and her bank of experts is embarrassing. Embarrassing. If you want to get to the truth, if you're confident in your verdicts, then to quote uh, some some of the research, what some of the researchers have said, especially Big Jeff. Big Jeff says, "You got nothing to hide. Why are you continuing hiding things?" Right? It's absolutely ridiculous. So if the state is very convinced in their verdicts, then they've got nothing to fear. All they have to do is hand over the evidence to her team of experts. They will do everything de novo from scratch and say, yep, I agree with you, or look, we have some issues here. You can already tell the impact that her experts have had. Just look at the blood stain on the back of the door. They've completely disproven the state's position. It wasn't due to having a body, Teresa's body being flung into the back of the car. It means that she likely was bludgeoned in the head with a blunt object. Now, if you go through Brendan's testimony, so-called coerced confession on March the 1st, they asked him many, many times, what did you do with the head? What did you do with the head? He never said we bopped her on the head with a heavy object. Nothing. That now starts to put in a lot of doubt. And we know that Brendan, as a witness, is probably one of the worst witnesses that you'll ever see because he wasn't there. So the statements that he's been making, they cannot be corroborated. So the investigators are trying to cobble together a story that's got so many holes in it. Well, Kathleen Zellner, with her experts, have punched so many holes in the storyline, it's actually very embarrassing. And we can see what's happened here, guys. One, they gave away the bones. They don't want her experts to touch the bones because it may reveal information that is exculpatory, right, to Stephen. We don't even know, really, strictly speaking, who the victim is, right? Because according to forensics, the FBI demand 20 loci. We've got a 7 loci match. We don't have a 20. So therefore, we can't actually conclude that the cremains do belong to Teresa Hallpark. And we know that Ken Kratz was very sneaky when he said, oh yeah, it's 100% Teresa Hallpark. That in actual fact, you can't say that. My fear is that the state has crushed the RAV4. And the only thing that's left is likely the panels with the blood, but without having the whole RAV4, let's hope I'm wrong, without having the whole RAV4, it's going to make testing a little bit more tricky. One strand.
I just want to say one last thing. If you're new to Stephen and Brendan's cases and you want to be able to connect with people, the hardest thing for me when I started was you couldn't really talk directly to other people and get answers and bounce your thoughts off of them. Join Discord and foul play on Discord because this is a community that is so focused on getting the facts out there and educating others. It's really a great place to connect because I've learned so much just in the short time. And I thank all of you for being so welcoming.
Thank you so much, one strand. Jack 61.
Just right quick, I know we're pushed for time, but I have to agree with you. I'm suspicious that the RAV is gone. I can't, of course, we Kathleen says it's there, but I've told you before, I have a suspicion that they've done away with it.
Yeah, correct. They're removing as much of the damning evidence as possible, and they're really blinding people with, all these new photo dumps, etc. But unfortunately, the critical stuff they're holding on to. All the photographs, all the analysis done at Cuss Road, the burn barrels, etc., they are keeping it to themselves. But Kathleen Zellner, with her experts, slowly is taking the case apart. And to me, that's awesome. So, guys, I really want to close here. We've gone on for quite a long period of time, but hopefully that you have, guys, that you have enjoyed the podcast. I think by doing it this way, we can actually cover an entire episode in one hit. We present the slides. You can go back through them again. You can launch your own research. You can talk to any one of us from Foul Play. Leave your questions, and I'm sure one of the guys on the panel or myself or someone else will gladly help out and get you going in the right direction. But guys, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. It's good to be back. It's good to be focused on the important things, which I believe is justice, justice for the boys, that hopefully they will be released to come home and hug their mamas, and also justice for Teresa Horbach as well. Thank you very much, guys. Do we have any final comments? Obi-Wan.
Well, to the I guess second to the last comment that was made about new people coming in all the time. I know that I've had a hard time, and I'm old at this. I'm like a veteran, which a lot of us are, but reaching out to some people and trying to talk to them hasn't really been all that successful. I know that some people are hard to get in touch with and stuff, but I like to give everybody the opportunity and speak with them to get their views and stuff. So I encourage people to engage with us, and they can ask us any questions. I mean, I'm always available, and I would never turn anybody down, but please join us on Discord, join the discussion, and hope to see you there, you know.
Fantastic, Obi-Wan. Fantastic. K9.
Yeah, just to back up what Obi says, realize that they're real. We're willing to help, and we'd enjoy having you. Welcome, Carol.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And the only comment I would like to make is please, if you like what we do, hit the like button and give us feedback, subscribe, turn on announcements so anything that happens, you guys wouldn't get to know about it. And at Foul Play, we like to do a team approach. And no one is an expert of this entire case. I certainly am not. I'm learning all the time. And what is impressive is that new people come in all the time and they've got information I've never even heard about. And it's awesome. My own background is in DNA. I know a little bit about DNA, and luckily for me, this case is a lot to do with DNA and the forensics, so I can help you guys out. But there are many other people at Foul Play that know aspects of the case much better than what I do. And some people live in Wisconsin. They understand the heartbeat of the county. They understand what's going on at a much more fundamental level. And, I'm very, very, very proud of my team, especially the individuals that work silently in the background, people that man the chat, BB, Lily, Sammy, Zoe, all these guys, Spooky, Catnip. I'm blessed to have a really great team around me, and we're here to help you guys. Thank you so much.
This has been a Foul Play production.